In this episode of Skippy Rock, I'll be taking you through the process of building this bookcase. It's a great weekend project that can be completed without any real woodworking skills, apparently. I was inspired to build this project when my neighbor sent me these photos and asked if I could build it for her daughter. This project was fairly straightforward and could be done with just a few supplies and basic woodworking tools. For tools, I used a table saw, chop saw, brad nailer, and a 5-axis industrial CNC milling machine. For supplies, I used a single 4x8 sheet of 1/2 inch cabinet grade plywood, wood glue, wood stain, and a polyurethane. The 4x8 sheet of plywood came from Home Depot, 4x8 feet. For easy transportation, they cut it into two 8-foot strips, one 26 inch and one 22 inches wide. Once I had the boards in my shop, I first needed to cut an 8-inch wide strip out of the 22-inch wide board. I used my table saw for this cut, and always remember, safety first! Next, I cut this strip into 7 13.5-inch long pieces for the shelves. I used my chop saw for these cuts. I set up a stop to make sure all my shelves end up the same length. This also allows me to flip the piece over and do a second cut, since my chop saw doesn't have that fancy extend a arm thingy on it. Oh, I also used a random orbit sander. I clamped the shelves together in a stack just so I could sand the edges together nice and evenly. Alright, this next part took a bit of thinking. The picture online made it look like the shelves didn't quite join up in the exact center. I messed around with the setup until my overseer approved of the layout. The decision was made to have the shorter side 6 inches and the longer side 7 inches. I transferred my measurement to 3 of the shelves, then fabricated 3 T's. I attached the shelves together with wood glue and a brad nailer. I'm not real sure why I put the wood glue down the middle of the shelf instead of on the end of the adjoining shelf. I couldn't think of a good way to clamp the pieces together. Also, I really wanted this to be a one-day project. After fabrication of all the T's, I laid it out to get approval from the overseer. We decided that 7 shelves wasn't enough, or we needed to add 2 more. So I cut out another 8-inch wide strip, cut 2 more 13.5-inch shelves, and constructed another T. To attach the T's together, I first measured the length of the shorter shelf segment with a scrap block of wood. Then cut this piece of scrap to the same length as the shorter shelf. I used this block as a guide to attach all the T's together. I attached the T's together the same way I made the T's, with wood glue and a brad nailer. I'm getting a lot of lines on my diagram, so I'm going to check off the segments that have been used. Next, I cut off a 10-inch wide strip from the 26-inch wide segment. I'll use this to fabricate the cabinet at the base of the shelves. After a discussion with the overseer, I decided to make the base cabinet 18 inches wide by 10 inches tall by 10 inches deep. I set up a stop on my chop saw to cut the top and bottom piece, and again for the 2 side pieces. The main reason for the stop when making just 2 pieces was so I could easily do the double cut to compensate for my tool being too short. I assemble the base cabinet with glue and brad nails.
Don't shoot yourself in the knee, that wouldn't feel very happy.
Next, it was time to attach the shelves to the bottom. To do this, I'll run a board along the back of the shelves all the way to the floor. This will also stabilize the shelves. This piece of wood came from the 8-inch wide strip I used to make the last of the 2 shelves. I discussed with the overseer where to stop the top of the support board. It was decided to bring it even with the highest point of the shelves. After cutting the board to length, I attached the cabinet base to the support board first, measuring the center of both. Then I attached it with wood glue and brad nails.
Will you put your hand on that side? Yeah, just hold it so it doesn't fall down.
When looking at how the shelves would sit on top of the cabinet, I decided I wanted more than a point of contact. So using my speed square, I marked a line that paralleled the top of the cabinet. Then, to prove I'm a real woodworker, I used a hand plane to cut away the point. I then positioned the shelves along the support brace and measured to make sure they were even on both sides. Once I had them where I wanted, I made a mark along the back of each shelf beside the support. This way, I could flip it over and attach the support to the shelves using the marks as a positioning guide. Then, I secured the support into place with glue and my brad nailer.
All right.
The last thing I had to make was the little box to slide in the cabinet. I cut another 10-inch wide strip from the leftover of the 26-inch wide board. Then cut out the front, back, and bottom, then the two sides.
Get out of the way.
The inside of the cabinet is 10 inches tall, so I actually cut this 1/8 of an inch shy of 10 inches.
Don't move until the blade stops. Push a lot of pressure down. Keep this from moving.
Again, using my stop, I cut out the front and the back pieces, then the two side pieces. I want all of these pieces to be the same height. I will have them surround the bottom panel. For the bottom piece, I cut it the same width as the side pieces.
Oh my goodness.
Then, I cut it 1 inch shorter than the front piece.
I know what you're thinking. If you've had a table all along, why aren't you using it? Shut up! I don't want your sass.
I then assembled the sides of the cabinet box around the base using wood glue and brad nails. And now for the worst part of any woodworking project, sanding and finishing. I got this thing cut out and put together in just a couple of hours. Now it'll take days to get it finished. I have the project's overseer sanding the shelf, just going over all the edges with 220 grit to move any sharp edges. For the cubby box, I'm using a power sander to really round over the edges and to make sure all my panel joints are smooth. I don't plan to use sliders for this, so it needs to be smooth so it doesn't bind coming in and out. After sanding and dust removal, it was time to stain the project. The overseer selected a dark walnut stain from my collection. The stain was brushed on with a disposable brush, and after a few minutes of drying, the excess is wiped away with a microfiber cloth. This is a very messy part of the project. If you have any children, this is a good step for them, as children are usually filthy anyway. After several hours of drying and a few rounds of Mario Kart, it was time to apply the first layer of finish. I used Minwax's water-based polyacrylic in clear gloss, because that's what I had. I applied the finish with a disposable brush, trying to use long, smooth strokes to get as even as a finish as possible. After the first coat dried, I sanded and smoothed with 220 grit sandpaper, then wiped off all the dust with a damp rag. This thing is a royal pain in the ass to varnish.
I'm gonna make them come back and do this themselves.
But I suffered through and I applied the second coat of polyacrylic myself. But since I got to suffer through the application, you get to watch the application. After the second layer dried, I decided it needed one more coat, so I sanded the entire thing down again with 220 grit and applied a third coat. This time, I decided to use a spray can of the same finish instead of a brush. Because of the awkward shape, this worked much easier. After it dried, it was ready to display. If you enjoyed this build, please like and subscribe. This is one of the first woodworking projects we put on this channel, but we'd be happy to do more. If you would like to build this project yourself and have any questions, please leave a comment. I'll answer quickly. And while this bookcase isn't huge, it can easily hold my entire collection.